Hi, it's Louise from Sincerely Louise, and in this video I'm going to teach you how to cast off. Once you've finished knitting all of the rows for your project, then it's time to cast off. And casting off is really important because it finishes the knitting and stops it from unravelling. Casting off is also known as binding off or the finishing edge, but throughout first time knits I'm going to refer to it as casting off. You may have learnt to knit using the English or the continental method, but throughout these videos I'm going to have my hands in the English way. If you're a continental knitter you can still follow these steps, but your hands will be in a slightly different position. As you've got to this point, I know that you can knit, so you're definitely going to be able to cast off, and then you're one step closer to turning your knitting into a phone cosy. Before you cast off, make sure your cast on tail is on the left hand side of the piece. Although garter stitch is reversible, it's good practice to make sure your cast on tail is on the left. If it's on the right, knit one more row and then turn your knitting around so the tail is on the left. Then follow these instructions. Like with knitting, place the needle with the stitches on in your left hand and the empty needle in your right. To cast off, knit the first 2 stitches on the left needle, so you just need to knit them, but only the first 2. I would recommend knitting them slightly looser than your normal stitches, so not pulling the yarn quite as tightly so it's looser on your needle. And you can see here my stitches are slightly looser than what I would usually have, and that's going to make them easier to cast off. Now take your left needle tip and push it through the front of the first stitch on the right needle, so that the left one crisscrosses over the right. So I'll show you that again. You're taking your left needle tip and pushing it through the front of that first stitch on the right needle, so that it crisscrosses over the right. Place your left index finger on the top of the right needle. Then grab the yarn coming from the ball so it slightly tightens the stitch. Then using the left needle tip, slide the first stitch over the second, transferring it completely over it and then off the right needle. Then remove the left one. What you'll see here is that first stitch has now been cast off and the second stitch you knitted is still there on the right needle. To cast off the next stitch, just knit it. Knit it slightly looser than usual like you did before. Once again you'll have 2 stitches on the right needle. Repeat these steps to cast off your next stitch. Take your left needle tip and place it through the first stitch on the right needle. So you're pushing it through the front of that stitch, not through the back, and it's important that the left needle crisscrosses over the right. You'll also notice I'm holding my stitches slightly further down the needle than I would when I'm knitting, and that's fine when casting off. Place your left index finger on the top of the right knitting needle and once again slide that first stitch over the second. Holding on to the yarn coming from the ball will make this slightly easier. You'll start to notice that cast off edge forming. In true knitting fashion, to cast off your next stitch you just repeat the process. So knit the next stitch from the left to the right needle, slightly looser than you would usually. Then place your left needle tip through the front of the first stitch on the right needle. Then slide it up and over the first stitch and off the right needle. Repeat this for every stitch you want to cast off. You may find that you want to use your fingers to help you when casting off because it can be a bit fiddly, but eventually you'll be able to do it with just your needles. Repeat the process for every stitch you want to cast off by knitting the first stitch from the left to the right needle slightly looser than you would usually. Then using your left knitting needle, slide the first stitch over the second and off the right needle. Cast off every stitch on your row until you reach your final stitch. You can always rewind the video to watch these steps again, or follow the photo tutorial in First Time Knits. For the phone cosy, you won't have too many stitches to cast off, but if you're casting off another project, you can pause the video and come back to it at this point. Once you reach your last stitch, knit that from the left to the right as usual, Then slide the first stitch over the second and you'll have one stitch left on your right needle. It can be tempting to take that needle away, but don't do that because you'll have a high chance of your work unravelling. So instead pull the needle away from the work, creating a big loop, and then remove it. Be careful at this point that you don't accidentally pull the yarn coming from the ball because this could unravel your work. Cut the yarn coming from the ball to leave a 60cm or 24-inch tail to sew up your phone cozy. Then, this is the best bit. Take that yarn and thread it through the loop. Then all you need to do is give it a pull to tighten it, and that finishes your project. And you can see that it's not going to unravel now that it's been cast off and I've pulled the yarn through that loop. Now that I've finished knitting my piece, I'm ready to sew it up to turn it into a phone cozy. And in my next video, I'll be doing just that. I'll show you how to sew it up using the backstitch and then decorate it. See you there!